Hey, I want to play a little a fun game I played with Kenny and Ryan from Bourbon Pursuits on here.
Those guys are a bunch of jerks, so I don't know.
Yeah, they were the worst.
Yeah, make sure that's the intro. No.
Yeah, right. Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am your host, Dan Krikorian. I am a songwriter, college basketball coach, and professor from Southern California. Each episode here, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the triumphs, challenges, and the twists and turns that they have taken in their chosen fields. Writers, musicians, coaches, athletes, business owners, and everything in between, we peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the Beautiful Work Podcast. We are in the middle of Whiskey Week, which is a whole week of podcasts featuring different members of the whiskey bourbon community all over the U.S., and this has been a blast to put together, and so much more on that. And our featured guest today, Blake Reber, in just a second. Some quick housekeeping. Those of you new to the podcast, thank you so much for joining. Once again, my name is Dan Krikorian, and you can find all the other podcast episodes on Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you could do me a favor and everyone a favor, if you could just rate or like or pass along these podcast episodes. It's really been amazing to see how it's grown with people just doing that, and that is free. And that doesn't take you too much time, and would really appreciate it. So find the Beautiful Work Podcast on any of those platforms. You can also visit dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com, and they take you to the same place where you can see all the show notes and whatnot, some other good stuff to go along with all of these episodes. And while you're there, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm also a singer-songwriter and college basketball coach, and my fifth record came out earlier this year and was out on tour with it all summer and spring, and I guess currently still doing it as well. And that album, Grandeur, has been it's gotten a lot of great critical acclaim, and we're excited about where it's been taking us. And if you're there on the website, please feel free to check that out, and check it out on iTunes as well as the other 4 albums. All right. Well, hope you enjoy this really great conversation with Blake and all that he's done to help promote bourbon in the bourbon community through his blog, bourboner.com. And he's a lot of fun to talk to, as you will see. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Blake Reber is the owner, operator, and creative mind behind the highly successful blog bourboner.com. That's spelled BOURBONR.com, no E. We'll let Blake explain why during the podcast. In 2013, Blake began posting on his blog about things he was interested in as a new bourbon drinker. After posting a release map of where the famous bourbon Pappy Van Winkle was being released, his blog climbed into the tens of thousands of monthly visitors. Since then, Blake has continued to build the blog and has become an active and reliable voice in the bourbon industry and online community. And a few years ago, Blake's entrepreneurial spirit found him filling another need in the bourbon and spirits industry, and he started Seelbachs.com, SEELBACHS.com, an online distributor and retailer of craft bourbon and spirits. Blake is here today to discuss becoming a surprise authority in the bourbon industry, why timing is everything, and whether Pappy Van Winkle is overrated or underrated. It's really good to have you on the show. You and I have been trying to connect for a couple of weeks, and we're both busy guys, and I'm glad we could find a little bit of time. And cheers, I felt like it was only fitting if I stopped and got a good bottle of bourbon on the way to talk to you. And so I'm holding the Weller's Reserve I picked up, and so cheers to you from across the way.
I am drinking some bourbon myself. I feel like that's a given. You know, when you tell people your site is bourboner.com, you're just expected to be drinking bourbon at all times, but I probably drink far less than people actually think. But, you know, I'm drinking a little bit of a New Riff single barrel I did. It's a newer distillery out of Kentucky, Covington, Kentucky. So, yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad we could finally make it work.
Absolutely. Well, let's before we dive into bourbon, you and I were talking a little bit before we started, but you're out in Florida and you are a sports fan, and so right now NBA basketball going on kind of in the background. I got it too. Going to keep an eye on some of the games tonight. What are you into sports wise out in Florida?
Yeah, so, you know, being an SEC country, obviously college football is a big one. So a lot of college football, big Florida fan. So, you know, not the greatest run in the past couple of years, but you know, my father-in-law is a high school football coach, and then between college game day and that kind of stuff, and then the Jaguars on Sunday, I feel like our Friday to Sunday is basically encompassed by football when the fall months hit, but not a bad thing. So yeah, I watch some NBA, like we said. I'm a little bit of a Chicago sports fan. My dad's from south of Chicago, so the Bulls and the Cubs. But as far as NBA playoffs goes, I haven't needed to watch it in about 10 years, you know, with the Bulls. So I usually just find out, you know, if the Timberwolves, I'll watch Tom Thibodeau coach, or, you know, wherever Jimmy Butler's playing. If he's with the 76ers, I'll root for them a little bit. But otherwise, I just enjoy sports and enjoy watching NBA. So, and then Florida will get it going eventually, in between football and basketball, I think. So,
yeah, they had a good run for a while, and you know, one of your former Florida Gators, Joakim Noah, made a run with the Bulls for a while. So there was that connection for you.
Which it was funny because being a huge Bulls fan and a huge Florida fan, I wasn't excited about that draft pick just because I thought, you know, I mean, I'm like, I get like Al Horford's going to be a guy, like he'll be an all-star, all this stuff, but I just never saw Joakim Noah being that great of an NBA player. I hate to say it, and I was completely wrong, which was even better, but he went on to be one of my favorite Bulls within definitely the last decade. You know, him and Kurt Heinrich. Are they're up there with me within the, you know, somewhat recent memory of Bulls basketball. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, good. Well, yeah, we'll keep an eye on those scores tonight, and as we head through the podcast. Well, I want to start with bourboner.com, and maybe I'll let you sort of explain what it is before we get into sort of the history of it for those that are listening that don't know yet.
Yeah, definitely. So Bourboner, it's just a blog or a bourbon website. And so what I try to do is it's things that I'm interested in the bourbon world. That could be anything from just reviews, tasting notes, I do a lot of weird experiments. If there's something I find interesting and I can apply it to bourbon, I'm probably going to do that. So you may see, you know, Magic Bullet blender get broken out every now and then. You may see, you know, who knows what. So that's really what Bourboner is. I do these release maps, and that's, you know, not to jump too much into the history, but that's what put bourbon on the map. That's what most people know it for. Is I do a Pappy Van Winkle release map every year, and then a Buffalo Trace Antique Collection release map every year. And so that draws a lot of people in. And then I kind of took that into just kind of building the community around that. And I think the Facebook group's up to, you know, probably 25,000 or so members that love it or hate it, there's people talking about bourbon constantly on there, and some people take it even more serious than they probably should. And as you can find with any hobby, there's going to be some people who just go a little too far. But overall, it's just trying to build the community. So I'm sure you've experienced a little bit of bourbon has a great community around it. You can have a drink with people, sit and talk and chat, and I mean this podcast episode in general, it's fun to talk about. So
absolutely. And I am a member now of the Bourboner group on Facebook.
Slippery slope. You gotta be careful.
I know, because I found myself, a couple times a day checking in on what people are talking about, but a lot of great information on there. People that they do share a lot, and it's very passionate community. With Bourboner, you start putting stuff on there. You talked about the release map. So when did you kind of see it start to tip where all of a sudden it was like, wow, this thing's really taken off? Do you remember a specific moment in time?
Yeah. So there was, I remember a very specific time. So I started the blog as a way, initially I wanted the site to be like an Untapped for beer but I wanted Bourboner to be like the Untapped for bourbon, where people could put their own reviews, and it just like, I'm not a developer, I couldn't keep up. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll just make a blog to kind of get more attention to the review and social media side of this site. And I put some posts up, did some reviews and all that kind of stuff, and it was pretty crowded. And then I noticed in a lot of like the different Facebook groups, a lot of other forums, people were like, hey, I'm in, Florida has Pappy hit this year. And I'm like, why doesn't somebody just collect this data? So I literally just put up, hey, this is the release map. I just scraped a map of the United States from Google Images, and in Microsoft Paint, I started highlighting each state by state as it went. And, I thought no big deal. And then all of a sudden, this was like right around the time my son was born. So I remember he was born in October, and if bourbon releases, that's when a lot of them are coming out. All of a sudden, I'm like sitting at the hospital getting all these emails. People are like, hey, Georgia released. Why isn't the map updated? What's going on? This is crazy. Like, what kind of services? And I'm thinking, what in the world? Do I have to like pull out my laptop? I mean, I don't have much to do. I'm just sitting here right now. And anyways, so I'm like, have my laptop up. But then there's, a couple hundred people on the site at a time just looking for this. And then I start checking like the Google Analytics side of it. And I'm like, man, there was like 80,000 people who came to the site this month just to see this map. So maybe I'm onto something here. And so that was where I was kind of realized, I think you never quite know it at the time. You kind of have an assumption, but I thought I was onto something, and it turned out I had great timing with it. But it's still in my mind a little bit. I'm like, people are, bourbon's having its moment, but it's going to die down soon. Well, that was 5 or 6 years ago, and it's done nothing but continue to grow and just really increase over the last few years. So it was definitely an interesting time, but that was the main part when I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here.
Yeah. And I imagine it's probably a fun moment to see something that you're doing sort of just as a side hobby to really take off. And I know going through the blog and your history that it's allowed you to do some pretty cool things with bourbon.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't even think my family knew. I don't think my wife knew I was into bourbon. I don't think she knew I even had a blog at the time. And I remember somebody was over at the house, and they're like, why are you on your laptop? What are you doing? I'm like, oh, I started this thing. They're like, what? Where did this even come from? But, you never quite know the opportunities. And I've had a chance to, meet a ton of great people, just take some pretty incredible trips and do a lot of fun stuff in bourbon.
Yeah. Now, do you, you talked about some of the places you've been and people you've met. Anybody or any place or any event in particular really stick out like, wow, this is pretty special?
Yeah, there's definitely been a few of those. Some of them are just like, opening bottle, like really good bottles, rare bottles with friends. I think about some of the bottles I've opened up, just old bottles, newer bottles that are hard to find with a group of buddies and sitting around drinking. That's always fun. You can't really beat that. And then other things like, I've gotten the chance to go drink with Fred Noe, who's his dad was Booker Noe from Booker's Bourbon. His, I guess, great uncle was Jim Beam. I think it maybe one or two greats somewhere in there, but to sit around a table at the Jim Beam house drinking bourbon with the guy with, Jim Beam's great nephew, and there's things like that. It's like, yeah, you can't buy something like that. You get lucky, you're thankful, and you enjoy it. And then just going to distilleries and meeting a lot of these distillers, walking around with them, seeing the passion that they have for it, walking around and drinking bourbon straight from the barrel. That kind of stuff's just priceless in my opinion, and a lot of fun to do.
I can imagine. Quite fun. After
you do it a few times, but then you're like, oh wow, like I'm really lucky. Like, I'm an accountant from Jacksonville. What am I doing in Kentucky acting like I'm a professional knowing what I'm talking about?
That's great. Yeah. I would imagine that would be quite an experience. Well, at this point, you're someone that, people they're constantly looking at your blog. I'm sure asking you, hey, what should I try? What should I try? What should I try? And you're getting new stuff all the time. But how do you find new bottles to try that you haven't tried before? People sending them to you or fans? Like, what's your way of going about it?
Yeah, so it's kind of across the board. You get a lot of people reaching out and saying, hey, I started this, or, we have this new line coming out. Can we send you a bottle? And in general, I take those bottles. I don't always guarantee people reviews because, there's just a lot coming in. Kind of going back to, I think this may have been before we went on air, but I have this basketball game that I play in 2 times a week, and about once a month I show up with a box for the guys. All right, everybody just take a bottle because my wife is going to kill me if this continues to grow, which, you can't really complain about having too much bourbon, but overall it's people reaching out. I'm still pretty heavily involved in the community aspect on Facebook and that kind of stuff. So seeing what people are posting about, talking about, and then just seeing different stuff in stores. I visit stores far less than I used to, but I'll still stop in or talk to guys I know and say, okay, well, what are you getting pitched? What are people liking? That kind of stuff.
Sure.
And you never quite know. I mean, really, for me, the surprises this year have been like, something like an Old Forester Rye, which is, I think I bought it for like $21 a bottle, and it's fantastic. And, you have all these people releasing at $100, $150 bottles and never not quite know what's in it. But then you've got these other distilleries who are just releasing stuff and at really good prices, and it surprises you. So that's always exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Weller's that I'm drinking right now it's fairly priced for how good it tastes.
Yep. That's the great thing you got to love about bourbon is there are still some gems out there. As much as we like to hate on overpriced stuff, there's still tons of good stuff sitting on the shelf if you're there at the right time at a good price.
Sure. So this week on the podcast, we've, guys that are master distillers, historians, documentary filmmakers, podcasters, and in your kind of corner, and the reason I was really glad that we could connect is you kind of have an interesting corner of ability to affect the bourbon industry from what you do. And so where do you see yourself fitting into the whole landscape of the bourbon industry in general?
Yeah. So, I think you just see more and more of people looking to things like social media or groups, friends, peers, that kind of stuff, to influence their buying decision. So, I think it plays a big part. And, I always tell people, like, I'm not a professionally trained taster. I don't have any kind of credentials. I've been tasting and drinking for a long time. So I kind of know what I like. And I try to describe what I like, or describe what I'm tasting. And so one thing I stopped doing a long time ago was stop putting like points on it. Say, well, this is a 90 point. This is an 85. What's the taste difference between an 85 and a 90? I don't know. So, well, yeah. But I try to describe it to people as, okay, it's heavy on the fruit, it's heavy on the dark fruit, whatever, more spice, that kind of stuff. And if you're into that kind of thing, you'll probably like it. And I think you see a lot more people, at least in kind of the enthusiast and what I like to quote or quote unquote call the bourbon nerd community is people being more influenced by that by just rather than just, okay, you know, there's some commercial on TV. So I think you see more and more people kind of tending towards that. And, you know, the amount that people are willing to give away for free in bottles and that kind of stuff makes me think that some of these brands are catching on to it as well. You know, I think the influencer movement is a big thing, and I personally think that's a kind of a dumb term, but hope nobody's like considering themselves an influencer out there is going to be offended, but you know, it's I don't know. I talk about what I like. People seem to follow it and enjoy it, and I like to have a good time with it. At the end of the day, you know, this is still a hobby for me, so I think that gives us, or you know, a lot of people who this is a hobby for, it gives us a little better ground to stand on, because you know, if I had a distillery cut me off of samples, it's like, oh man, okay, you cut me off samples because I gave your last 3 samples, you sent me a bad review. You know, it doesn't kill me. I can still go out tomorrow and buy a bottle if I really need to review it on. But you know, there does come some responsibility once people start listening and kind of paying attention to your reviews, because you don't want to just throw stuff up that's kind of fluff, but at the same time, I don't want to get so overly involved that I forget it's whiskey and it's kind of about drinking and enjoying and having a good time.
You're right. Exactly. Have you found sort of the demographic for people that are, you talked about the whiskey nerds, for you, where do you try to, I guess, position the blog and even yourself? Are you trying to do the kind of everyman that's just looking to drink once a weekend and have a nice bottle, or are you trying to tailor more towards the higher end people that are really, really into it?
Yeah, so my stuff leans more towards the people who are really, really into it. And so, you know, 5 or 6 years ago, that was a small piece of the pie, but really that's expanded significantly. You know, I'd say the enthusiast category probably makes up close to 25 or 30% now, whereas 5 and 10 years ago, that was about 1%.
Yeah.
I heard a master distiller say once, I don't even remember who it is, or I give him credit, but you know, he said 8 years ago he was going to tastings and saying 51% corn, it's got to be in new charred oak barrels. Now tasted, it's going to be a little bit sweeter because of this or that. And he said, now I go to tastings and people are like, now tell us about the positioning of the rick house. Now with the airflow and the temperature control, what do you do? And he's like, this is the average consumer who's coming to my tastings now. So you see that whole demographic has grown a lot. And really, like, I try not to think too much about, you know, who I'm targeting. I just try to do what I like. Sure. And I figure I'm kind of the average consumer. So if I like it, there's probably a bunch of other people who do too. You know, There's some swings and misses, and then there's some home runs like the Pappy Van Winkle release map. And you never quite know what's going to be what. You know, I put a lot of time into certain posts and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I wish I had this 5 years ago whenever I was getting into it. And nobody cares about the post. Then you got some things where you throw together in like 2 minutes and, you know, it goes crazy. But that's kind of the fun part about it too. And I think you just can't get too caught up in it. And it kind of goes back to the hobby part of it as well. Even though I've kind of, I'm sure we'll get into this as well, but I've transitioned it into like this other site, Sealbox, which is a little more than a hobby. Bourboner, I try to keep that isolated of, you know, I'm going to talk a lot about bourbon, may talk about a little rum, going to do a bunch of cooking stuff because that's just stuff I like to do. So
This episode's featured bartender is Miles Cush from the Pope House Bourbon Lounge in Portland, Oregon. The Pope House is perennially ranked as one of the top bourbon bars in all of America. And Miles is here today to talk about one of his favorite drinks to make, as well as a little advice on how to enjoy bourbon. Here's Miles.
But there are some forgotten classics that I really like personally starring bourbon. One of my favorites is the Seelbach cocktail. It's from the Seelbach Hotel in Kentucky, down in Louisville there. I think it's wonderful, wonderful cocktail. It's bright, it's bubbly, especially like it for any time you have like kind of a celebration dinner. We always drink them at Thanksgiving and Christmas. They're rich, and they're one of my favorite drinks. Super versatile, and I think they're pretty easy to put together. It's something you can do at home. Basically, it's built so you don't need any type of technique or special barware or anything like that. Basically, you have a champagne glass, and you're going to want to use an ounce of good quality bourbon. Add to that a half ounce of orange liqueur. I like Cointreau or Pierre France dry curacao, but any orange liqueur is fine. And then that gets topped with a pretty ungodly amount of bitters. We're going to go 7 dashes of Peychaud and 7 dashes of Angostura bitters. That is a ton of bitters. And then the whole thing gets topped with sparkling wine, nice champagne or Prosecco, and an orange twist. The bitters give it this lovely hue, this kind of deep scarlet color. They bring in like all that spice flavor that's really punchy. That's great for the holidays, and I think having that combination of the bubbles plus an ounce and a half of liquor, it's a great way to kick off a party, get everyone in good spirits pretty quickly there.
Any other suggestions or advice on finding a good bourbon?
There's lots of things that I enjoy when it comes to drinking bourbon, and I think that's a good thing to note. I mean, I think we talked about drinking bourbon in the Northwest. How it's so great in the winter when it's dark. Cocktails give bourbon the versatility to be drank, in the summertime as well too. Brighten them up, add citrus notes, everything like that. I think as opposed to so much more pushing into one of our cocktails. I mean, something that I really like to think about or talk to people about is about the right ways to enjoy bourbon. We get guests in a lot, say, "Oh, this is a pretty nice bourbon. It's $20 a glass. Can I put ice in it?" Yeah, of course. This is your whiskey. No one else is going to drink it for you. So I think if I had one thing to share, I think I'd really like to kind of speak to the fact that as bourbon gets more and more fancy and less of an everyman sort of stigma to it, and all these special releases come out, to remind everyone that it's just for fun drinking. We want to consider taste. It's how you like it. It's your drink. It should make you pleased. You should enjoy yourself, drink it. There's no wrong way to do it. And that kind of philosophy is something that I really like to push with all of our staff and all the guests that we have in. That this is to wash your day away. This is your time to sit and reflect and enjoy something that we put out there.
And now, back to Blake. Maybe this is a good time to transition into your other job at Seelbach's and maybe explain what that is and what you do with them.
Yeah, so Seelbach's kind of, I guess as all great business ideas do, came from a need. So with Bourboner, I did a bunch of different barrel picks, and what I realized is distribution in the alcohol world it's insane. Nothing has changed since Prohibition. So we still have the 3-tier system. And so I'm basically bouncing around the country trying to do these different barrel picks because I'm like, oh, I want to do, a barrel pick or barrel craft spirits barrel pick. I've got to go to New York. Okay, I want to do this one. Well, I can get Four Roses can get a guy in California. And then, after I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So since in DC, I was like, okay, I can do my barrel picks. At the same time, I'm starting to see a bunch of these craft distilleries that I want to do barrel picks from and realize there's nobody really focusing on the craft distilling market. So with Seelbach's, what I do is I, go to a bunch of different craft distilleries. I'm able to bring them into my DC warehouse. And, it's just an online retailer at that point. So shipping is pretty convoluted, and so I wish I could ship to all 50 states. I can't, but I can ship to a certain amount of states, and so that's really the whole idea. Is I bring in craft spirits and ship them out to people who New Riff, as I told you I was drinking now, They're only available in Ohio and Kentucky right now. A little bit in like Illinois, that kind of stuff. But now people can come on Seelbach's and buy a bottle, and they're one where they're cranking out a lot of really good bourbon. And there's a ton of producers like this, either rums or bourbon, or a lot of people making really good brandy and like Applejack, which is apple brandy. Wow. So that's what's really exciting to me now, is to find these little, these smaller producers and bring them to a larger audience.
You mentioned a little while back when you were talking about the 3-tier system and distribution, how it's difficult. Could you maybe dive into that a little bit more? Because someone like myself is a little naive to what that's all about.
Yeah, so basically the 3-tier system, which was mandated after Prohibition, well, essentially they allowed the states to decide after Prohibition, but everyone took the 3-tier system except for maybe like Washington State. But so you have the producer, which would be a distillery. They have to sell to a distributor. Then the distributor has to sell to the retailer. Then the retailer has to sell to the customer. And that can't change by law. Okay. You're stuck with it. And, the thing is, everyone along the way gets their margin. And so what I ran into on a barrel is I basically told the distributor and retailer, like, hey, look, I'm bringing you 200 customers. They're going to buy the bottles immediately. Can you give me a little bit of a discount on the price? Like, I'd like to get a better price for my Bourbonr members. And the retailer said, maybe I can give you like 5 or 10%. Let me talk to the distributor. Distributor, nothing, not budging. They don't care, because they know, like, by law, you have to go through them. There's no other option. And so, like, I don't blame them. Why would you? And so then I was like, there's got to be a better way. So DC has a little more, we'll call them business friendly laws in that regard. So I can kind of work with a little more flexibility.
Got it.
With a lot of these distilleries.
Okay, that makes sense. And so, and you said you're specifically trying to help out a lot of these really high end or nicer craft distilleries that you believe in with Seelbach's.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's not like necessarily pushing people away from the bigger names, but when I look at the landscape, it's like, well, if I'm going to be online, you can go to any store and buy Four Roses. You can go to any store and buy, Jim Beam or whatever it is. So I don't need to carry that for you, but I want to bring stuff that you've never heard of, or that you may have heard of, but you can't find at your local retailer. And I just think it's kind of just this evolution of, as people try more and more stuff, it's like, okay, I've tried a lot of different stuff from Buffalo Trace. It's all really good, but I want to try something different eventually. Yeah. And I think as the craft movement evolves, see more and more people pushing towards something a little bit different. And, with everyone, it's different. Some people it's, hey, I used to live there. It's really cool that we now have a distillery. Can I buy a bottle? Some of it's that. Other people, it's like, I liked your review on it. I'll take a shot on it and give it a chance. But all in all, I just think there's so much more. There's a lot of story involved in some of these craft distilleries, whereas some of the bigger guys, you can go and visit, and I mean, it's a manufacturing plant for alcohol at the end of the day. Sure. There's some lore, some, pre-prohibition recipes and grandpa's, cough medicine, whatever it is that they're selling. But a lot of these smaller guys, they have stories to tell, but it's not all about the heritage and everything. It's, hey, we grow all this grain ourselves. We process it in-house. It's done on a much smaller batch. And to me, that's really interesting. The whole, I think we saw a lot in the farm to table with food with the last, 8 or 10 years, and even more as it's now starting to progress with like the farm to bottle. I have a rum producer that they grow their own sugar cane. They process it into cane syrup. They make rum out of it. And then there's other guys who they make all their grain, or maybe they make all the corn, and then they have to source a little bit of the rye and barley, that kind of stuff. but it just makes for a very interesting story and a unique product. And it's a lot of this stuff is just it's unlike other bourbons and whiskeys that you can find from the major players.
But how do you feel? There's this boom right now. What do you think that the effect is of all these craft distilleries coming into the market and flooding the market? Do you think it's a good thing for the industry because the competition and because there's new flavors and younger people are getting into it? Or will it have an effect where maybe there's a lot of not so good whiskey on the market and could have the opposite effect?
Yeah, so craft kind of tarnished its name a little bit with, a lot of stuff coming out that it's like, from a business perspective, I get it. Like, they have to get cash in the door if they want to stay open. But then you get a bottle that's sitting on the shelf that's, craft whiskey, and it's $100 and it's 3 months old in a 10-gallon barrel. That's not going to make good whiskey. I don't care how it was distilled, where it's from, that kind of stuff. It's not going to make good whiskey. So the name got tarnished a little bit, but I think we're seeing more and more people realizing and kind of learning from those mistakes of, hey, we gotta let it age, and we need to put something good out. Somebody like a New Riff, and I feel like I'm giving them a big promo, so I'll talk about somebody else soon. But
it's okay.
They waited till the product was 4 years old before they ever released anything of their own. And that's a tough thing to do from a business perspective when you're talking about, hey, we're not gonna see $1 coming back in the door in general for 4 years. Like, that's really hard.
Sure.
But then I think it just gives people a better representation of what craft whiskey can be. Even there's one, it's called J. Henry and Sons. They have an interesting story. So they're farmers, so they grow all their own grain, and then they ship that grain to a distillery down the road who distills it for them, puts it in a barrel, ships it back to their farm in a barrel. And they waited, same thing. I think they were even 5 years that they waited before they ever released it. So there's more and more people coming out who are like, look, like, we need to be well capitalized, whatever it takes. We're going to wait that amount of time to start selling. And I think the more we see of that, the better. And people not getting burned on that, $80 bottle that's going to, you're going to try it once and think, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And it's going to sit in your cabinet for the next 5 years.
Right.
And, until you can pawn it off on someone as a gift or something.
Sure.
Yeah. All in all, I think we're just going to see a ton more bourbon and whiskey on the market over the next 5 to 10 years, because all the big guys have, really ramped up their production, as well as a ton of new smaller players coming on board. So.
Whiskey, whiskey, whiskey. How talented are thee? Your powers are not just in thirst, but curing a list of maladies. They say in moderation, you aid digestion, help with blood clots, and prevent diabetes. And hot toddies cure the common cold. How lucky can one guy be? You can start fires, soothe a toothache, clean an engine or a knee, and help some cut up a dance floor when they've had more than 3. Whiskey, 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 how talented are thee for helping cure what ails us, all the way from A to Z. Hey, so someone like yourself that's that has, people that follow the blog and you're very involved in the business, what are some questions that you get asked all the time that maybe are really annoying to answer over and over again about bourbon?
Yeah. So this is where the the double-edged sword really comes in. So I talked about the Pappy Van Winkle release map. If I had $1 for every time somebody said, hey, I want to buy a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and I'm like, Good news. So do I. So, and it's funny. Like, I guess, people don't understand the market, but like, I don't even get Pappy Van Winkle anymore. No stores are giving me any. They don't care. They're trying to sell it for the highest price they can. So that's probably up there, but you can't complain too much. The other one is people will say, well, I don't really like bourbon, but what's one I should start with? I'm like, I don't know. If you don't like it, like you don't like it. I don't think you should force yourself to enjoy something,
Yeah.
I don't know how to answer this question.
That's good.
Those are probably up there for the two where I'm just
okay. Those are good. Yeah. Good. I'll cross those next two off my list of things to ask you.
So next email, follow up with, that's like, so my sister texted me this week, hey, I got a friend who wants a bottle of Pappy. How much would it be? I'm like, well, here's, what secondary is. She goes, oh man, that's expensive. I'm like, yeah, it's expensive. She goes, will you give me a cut of the price? I'm like, I'm not making any money off of it. I'm just connect your friend with somebody who has a bottle.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Hey, I want to play a little a fun game I played with Kenny and Ryan from Bourbon Pursuits on
Those
here.
guys are a bunch of jerks, so I don't know.
Yeah, they were the worst.
Make sure that's the intro. No.
Yeah, right. But Ryan especially, he wanted to keep playing this this next game that we're going to play. It's called Overrated, Underrated, or Properly Rated.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, I like it.
Okay, so I've got a few things here, bourbon, whiskey related, and you tell me if you think that it's overrated, underrated, or properly rated, and why. Mm-hmm. Okay. Maybe I got a couple of different ones and a couple of the same ones that I gave them. I want to see
how their judgment is, because I know mine's correct. So
good. Okay. Well, let's okay. I'll give you what I gave them. Second barrel finishings, or whiskey that's finished in some second barrel. Is that whiskey overrated, underrated?
I'm going to go with underrated, and they're probably going to go the opposite. But I actually like a barrel finish, and I think I've argued this point with them before.
Okay.
The thing the barrel should see is a new charred oak barrel, but you can expand so much out of that. And I mean, I'm going to go with underrated still. I think there's still a lot of great finished bourbon to come.
Okay. Yeah. I got both Ryan and Kenny went overrated on that one.
See, that's the difference in Kentucky and in Florida.
Okay.
I'm like, how can we expand this?
Well, good. So the next one that kind of leads into it. 95% of bourbon is made in Kentucky, but the bourbon that is made outside of Kentucky, underrated, overrated, properly rated.
At this stage in the game, I'm going to go with properly rated, because overall bourbon outside of the state of Kentucky doesn't have a great track record. And that's probably accurate. The ones that are really good outside of the state of Kentucky are outliers, unfortunately. But those are growing. So
okay.
I'm going to go with properly rated.
Okay. Ryan went with overrated. Kenny went with underrated on that one.
so we got to cross the board there. Okay.
Yeah, you guys nailed them all. Okay. Yeah. The third one, we sort of touched on this throughout the podcast already, but that first sip, if you've never tried it, the first sip of Pappy Van Winkle, overrated, underrated, properly rated.
I mean, I have to go overrated, just with the amount that people talk about it and pay for it. No bourbon will ever taste $2,000 good. Now, if you want to spend that money and enjoy it, have at it. Like, have a good time and experience it. I don't blame people for doing that, but it's good bourbon. That's all it is. But
okay,
I'm still going overrated.
Okay, yeah, they both trended that way. They said it's good, but they said for the price, you could find stuff that's.
They're like, and I used to do a bunch of blind tastings through Bourboner, and I'd always throw in, I think I threw in a Van Winkle 12 year and a Van Winkle 10 year. So not the Pappy, but the same line. And I think the 10 year got like a 79 was the average rating in a blend. So the Poor Man's Pappy, which is the blend of the Weller 12 and Weller Antique, it got the highest rating. And, a few years ago, the Weller 12 and Weller Antique was sitting on every store shelf for $30. That's a little more expensive now, but it's maybe $150 at the most. But still, as much as I love Pappy, I gotta say it's at an overrated point. And the Van Winkles would probably agree, but
yeah, Ryan poetically put it. It's just really expensive piss.
Yeah. That's at the end of the day, that's what this all is. So, which, what was Jay-Z? I think Jay-Z had a line was, would you rather be overrated or underpaid? So, I'd stick to the I gotta Google that. I'd stick to I'd rather be overrated, but
yeah. All right, well, good. Well, I gave him those three, and we had a good time with those three. So thanks for playing along with me. Hey, as we start to kind of get towards the end of the podcast, I have a couple of sort of non-bourbon necessarily related questions that I like to ask all the guests. And well, the first one is, how do you continue yourself to learn or to grow? Like, are you a reader, podcast listener? What do you do on a daily basis or weekly basis?
Yeah, so for years I've been a big reader. That has kind of scaled back some. So I don't think I've gotten into this point, but so I have 4 small kids. So like a quiet house is just usually doesn't happen. So I kill a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. I still probably go through, I don't know, 5-6 episodes of a podcast a week, maybe more. And then I'll knock out a book or so a week. But I'm constantly reading and that kind of stuff. And that's just something that I've always enjoyed. I love learning about new things. For me, it's almost like a little bit of that OCD probably kicks in a little bit. But if I get on a subject that I like I just got to learn everything I possibly can about it and keep reading. And, I can keep my focus for forever if I do that. So I don't physically read as much, but, a lot of audio at this point, which it's funny. My mom told me this is probably 3 or 4 years ago. I was talking to my brother about Audible, and his Audible and Scribd are 2 big ones that I use. And she was like, oh yeah, we've always been an Audible learner. So that makes sense. I'm like, well, why'd you tell me that in my 30s? Why didn't you tell me that when I was 14, 15 years old? But it makes sense now. And that's probably why I listen to so much. So
nonfiction, fiction, what's your
pretty
go-to?
much all nonfiction. I'll pick up some fiction here. I've been on a really big binge of podcasts that are not true crime. Some of them are true crime, but some a lot of political story. There's one about the Blagojevich, which was the governor of Illinois. I'm listening to one about it was Nixon's vice president. Anyways, a lot of nonfiction stuff. I just love that.
That's cool. Yeah. My wife is a crime junkie podcast listener. There is a podcast called Crime Junkie that she listens to. But,
I probably listen to them all at this point, because I'll get one I don't know if she listens to Over My Dead Body or Dr. Death or Serial and all those, and I'm like, I'll knock out the entire series in a day and a half, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to get back to work now. Well, I'm sitting at my desk doing tax returns, listening to this show. Yeah. Some of them are
they're really good, kind of creepy, and she wonders why she can't get to sleep that easy some nights after listening.
It is very true. I'll look around, I'm like, that car's been behind me for a while now. The FBI tapping my phone calls. I'm like, I don't even do anything illegal, but
Right. So for you, and I know you've kind of made this really interesting career for yourself and things that you're doing, but what's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think starting the website, which at the time I think I paid, whatever a URL is, and then I paid a few $100 for the Bourboner blog to get set up and all that kind of stuff. That's definitely up there. Few certain bottles of bourbon, I'm going to consider those good investments. But then overall,
Sure.
and then now, like buying this Sealbox license, that's opened up so many doors now. So that's probably the biggest one, definitely within the last year of, just opening up doors, because now I talk to all these guys. It's like, hey, we're trying to do this private barrel, but we can't get it to work. I'm like, look, I had that exact same problem. I can show you how to get this done now. So that's definitely been the one, and just the time, all this stuff is time. So that's without getting too like philosophical. That's the biggest investment we can make. And at the end of the day, like I enjoy doing it, so it doesn't feel like work, but the time is an investment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I heard an interesting story you said once on some podcast, some might have been Bourbon Pursuit, about why there's no E in Bourboner.com. Could you tell that story?
Yeah. So I guess it's not necessarily an adult audience, but so there's no E in Bourboner, because whenever I was looking at it, I'm like, man, that looks like Bourboner.com. And I don't know what. That's not my personality to have that kind of joke in the name. So I'm like, I don't want it to come across as that.
Sure. That's good.
But it's one of those things too. Like, I came up with that name like randomly sitting in my office on a Tuesday so you never think it's going to stick with you for the next 6 years, but here we are. And I'm glad it doesn't have the E. I'm glad I at least had the foresight to eliminate that part of it. So
absolutely.
Maybe another site that somebody else tries to create.
Hey, what, from the things that you do in your career, what brings you the most joy and satisfaction in working in the bourbon industry?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just love creating things. And I love business. I have a accounting firm outside of this as well. And so I love working with businesses. I love working on my own business. I love all of that. And so taking something from an idea to, hey, this is actually a site where people are buying from, or hey, this is a blog where, thousands of people are coming to and talk to, like, that's just exciting to me. And I love to keep doing that. It can be tricky at times, because it's like with Bourboner now, I'm not creating as much new stuff anymore, but it's like, it's still ongoing. So you don't want to just like have the newlywed phase with a bunch of ideas and you're just on to the next idea constantly.
Sure.
But for me, it's about learning new things, and the bourbon world's so expansive. There's always something new to learn, and then kind of sharing that with others. Yeah.
I've been so not surprised, but all of you that are a part of this this whole whiskey week and whatnot, been so willing to kind of share, and there's like this real community around bourbon that I've found to be probably one of the big reasons that it's taken off so much, because people enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I always kind of make the joke of 5 or 6 years ago, if I told my wife I was going to get a drink with a guy at a bar that I met on the internet, there may have been like divorce paper, a lot of hard questioning going on. Now it's just, okay, what's his Twitter or Twitter name, or what's his Instagram handle? It's like,
yeah,
not a normal thing, but it is true, and it makes it fun. Like you can share this camaraderie and all over whiskey, which
yep.
But there's just so much more around it too. It is the whole community. So
absolutely. Well, hey, before we finish, I'll give you whatever 15, 20, 30 seconds. Anything that you got going on personally you want to promote right now with your sites, I'll go right ahead.
Well, thank you. Well, first, thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. So glad we got to do it. And then second, if you're interested in more bourbon in news, release updates, all that kind of stuff, go to bourbonr.com. That's bourbonr.com. And if you are interested in trying stuff a little bit different, stuff you won't find at your local store, from some smaller craft producers, check out sealbox.com. That's SEELBACHS. And part of my naming of companies and websites is they can't be easy to pronounce or spell. Can't tell you, like my own sister was like, now what's your site called? SEALBOX? I'm like, no, it's kind of how it sounds. But there's a story behind the Seal Box, like Bourbonr. I don't even know what the story behind it is, other than I didn't want the E. Seal Box, it was a cocktail where this guy at the Seal Box Hilton in Louisville, Kentucky, he found this pre-prohibition recipe book. Everyone loved it. It's a big hit. And then a few years ago, he came out and said, oh, by the way, that was just a cocktail that I made up. The whole story I made up. I just thought it sounded cool. And so that's kind of the idea, is there's a lot of people claiming to be craft or small handmade producers, and maybe made by a manufacturing plant in Indiana. So
that's awesome. Well, and you'll be happy to know we've had 4 or 5 mixologists, bartenders come on the show, coming on as well to talk about some of their favorite drinks that they make from some of the best bourbon bars in the country. And yesterday was talking to bartender Miles from Portland, from the Pope House Bourbon Lounge, and his favorite to make is he calls it the Seal Box cocktail.
Oh yeah,
and he talked about the hotel and how he made it, and so there you go.
It's a great cocktail. You need to give it a try if you haven't yet. But no, I always loved that story, and I heard that story like it was probably 3 years ago or so, and I'm like, just kind of put it in the back of my head. And then sure enough, I had a good idea. I'm like, that would be the perfect name for it. But yeah.
Cool. Well, Blake, thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and we look forward to fall and all that you do. And best of luck with everything that you got going on, and especially best of luck with those 4 little ones running around.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much to Blake Reber for that interview and for being so open about everything that he's been doing with Bourbonr and as well as with Seal Box now. And so make sure to go check out bourbonr.com, bourbonr.com, as well as Seal Box, SEELBACHS.com to see all that Blake is up to. For more information on the podcast, to hear all the other episodes, and to get show notes, please go to dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. They both take you to the same spot. Thank you guys so much for listening. Sign up for the newsletter, and until next time, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. See you soon. Bye.